There are 6 basic algorithms that you really need to know. Linear regression, logistic regression, KNN, K-means, support vector machines, and trees.
Somebody that is trying to break into data science, how should these people be thinking about landing their first role? I'm Naman Pandey, and in this episode featured not expert is Karun Thankachan. Karun got his master's in data science from CMU, after which he had stints at Amazon as well as Walmart.
Was lucky enough to land an internship at Amazon and convert that. Worked there as a data scientist and applied scientist, and now working as a senior data scientist at Walmart.
Your experiences at CMU, how is that different from master's in computer science?
You have the LeetCode blind 75, LeetCode SQL 50, and advanced SQL 50. If you are comfortable with all three, you would go in 80% of the interviews.
Could you help us untangle data engineering, data science, and machine learning engineering?
I completed basically 18,000 bookings, 4,000 one-on-ones. So most of my impressions of the job market come from those conversations.
Our discussion today is focused on data science and everything that it entails for you to get hired as a data scientist.
Most mentees simp out on the preparation for dynamic programming, and that usually comes to bite them.
In 2025, Meta is going to start replacing their mid-level engineers with AI.
PySpark is very common, Docker is very common, Airflow is very common, visualization tools, Tableau is market leader. Data science has two distinct roles, product data science and applied data science.
In keeping with our theme of learning from somebody that's just 2 steps ahead of us instead of an expert, my goal with this episode is to highlight the incredible journey that Karun has had in the data science field and what you can learn from it to get hired yourself. This is the Ready Set To podcast, and to support it, subscribe to me on YouTube and leave me up to a 5-star rating on Spotify or your favorite podcast app. There are also links in the description. And now, my friends, without any further ado, here's Karun. Welcome to the Ready Set Do podcast, where we learn from journeys of not experts who are just 2 steps ahead of us. Karun, welcome.
Hey Naman. Nice to be here, man.
So glad to have you. I want to kick off here by firstly congratulating you on being the top 100 in the data TopMate list that had come up recently, I think. So from there, I kind of want to open the door to for you to just kind of share a little bit about the type of mentoring that you do in this field, and especially around some of the most common pitfalls that you see in most of the students that reach out to you for help.
For sure. Why, just maybe to give a bit of context on why I started, when I was looking for a job in 2023, I had sort of built a somewhat small network on LinkedIn by then. Basically, when I sort of made a post of open to work, quite a few people in my network reached out to me and said that they can help sort of navigate the current job market and figure out how to land a role in their companies. People, some of them who I did know, some of them who were a bit new, and I was like pleasantly surprised by people's willingness to help, and I sort of wanted to pay it forward. That's how I sort of started on TopMate. And yeah, primarily on TopMate, do a lot of one-on-one mentoring. I talk to at least one person a day.
Wow,
Apart from that, yeah.
that's crazy, man. Wow, that's just incredible.
Yeah, it also sort of helps in like multiple ways. One, just to keep the energy up. People who are actively looking for a job have a different kind of drive than once you sort of get settled into your job. Yeah, folks who are fresh out of college or in college, they work on like really interesting, really amazing sort of like cutting edge projects. Which sort of again inspires you, and also it sort of helps drive like most of the content I generate on LinkedIn. Like I get to figure out, understand what the problems they are facing in the current job market is, what kind of questions they get in the interviews, and therefore it informs a lot of my content as well. And yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, and apart from one-on-one sessions, do a lot of webinars as well in terms of like tackling the job market. And I think completed recently like 18,000 bookings, 4,000 one-on-ones. So
Yeah.
most of my, I guess, impressions of the job market and everything come from those bookings and conversations essentially. And based on that, I would say the most common pitfalls, at least in terms of landing a role, I guess I could divide it into two areas. One is sort of on the projects area. So within like projects, it's basically uh, how they sort of pick problems to solve. Like most students, I feel, don't really pick business oriented problems. Like the most accessible data sets tend to be the ones that are kind of commonly used on Kaggle, which is like the housing price prediction one, or the handwriting recognition,
I
or
know there's some medical stuff as well, right, on there?
yeah,
Not right. Yeah.
so medical stuff being like breast cancer detection, few things like that. Uh, they are more of what we call toy problems. They're really good to help you understand machine learning and get a handle on how to build models, but may not really come across interesting or relevant to a hiring manager or a recruiter who's going through your resume. So selecting problems or like actual relevant business problems really helps you stand out in the current market. And that is like one of the most common issues I see with most of the mentees that I work with, the kind of problems that they select. And then a few other things with how they approach problems, as in you need to be aware that model metrics and business metrics are different. If in your resume you write you got an accuracy of like 90% or F1, those don't have a lot of meaning to a hiring manager. It's more about the kind of impact that you're able to create in terms of business metrics. And then the other thing is when they're talking to you in an interview, it's about how you present, how you tackle that problem. Most mentees have this habit of, oh, I tried this particular, like a set of like these three algorithms. This one worked the best, so I went with that. Typically in the industry, that may not be how you go about it. Usually you do like what's called like a literature review to see how people have solved this problem in the past, and maybe based on that figure out, okay, these methods have seemed to work well, therefore I will try and test out these methods. Typically whenever you make a decision or a choice behind a model or a metric, it has to be backed by some kind of, not necessarily research, but just survey, and it becomes kind of simplified in this day and age because of like Perplexity and
For
ChatGPT
sure.
makes
Yeah.
literature review a lot more. So
Make sense.
selection of project and that process, I feel like that is sort of the main um pitfall. And then there's another region with like applications, but yeah, we can dive into that later.
Yeah.
As well.
For sure, yeah. So I was going to bring that up down the road a little bit. So from what you've laid out, I think that's very interesting. In that, firstly, that makes total sense to me, right? Like they've probably seen that same problem being solved a few hundred times by now. So what are you doing to differentiate yourself? So I really like what you said about picking a problem that you want to solve and that not everyone out there is solving. So the second thing from there is, and admittedly, a lot of this discussion might be, I'll be trying to catch up with what you're trying to lay down just because this is not my field, but it is kind
Mm.
of because I do come from technology, but, just not as deeply embedded into the code
But
end of things,
yeah.
probably as you are. So I guess what I'm wondering, Karun, is say somebody, is just a student, they don't actually have a lot of experience under their belt outside of projects and or just solving algorithms on LeetCode and such. How do you recommend somebody that is just trying to break into data science, irrespective of whether they finish their bachelor's or master's? Because I feel like there probably isn't a lot of difference if you're just a no,
Yes.
amateur student without any work. So how should these people be thinking about landing their first role? I know you mentioned projects, but what are some other things that they could potentially be looking?
So projects is the one that we highlight the most because that's the sort of the most effective way to convince hiring managers that you can actually deliver results. But apart from that, the next way of like landing a role in data in general um, would be networking to a certain extent. Primarily because it's the job market is kind of noisy right now. It's very hard to stand out. There are a lot of AI tools that will tailor a lot of your resumes and cover letters for you. So recruiters aren't really able to distinguish between one candidate or the other. There are a lot of companies even coming up that will do the applications for you for like as low as like $1 for 5 applications. So yeah, the market is definitely quite noisy, which is why if you can get a referral from an employee who's working in the role that you're targeting, like a data analyst referring
Yeah.
or data analyst role, that can have a lot of weightage.
Makes sense.
Apart from that, yeah,
And a portfolio, right? Probably is that a thing that happens in this field or not really?
Yeah, the projects sort of, if you bake them together in like a website, that will definitely stand out. But again, that would, as long as you select good projects and present them well on the resume, then that's sort of like 80% of the lifting. Portfolio is sort of like the 20% maybe optimization you can do. But yeah, the project selection comes. But if like you feel your projects are good, the next best way to stand out is networking. And maybe like networking is what I sort of emphasize. There have been some people who have mentioned that um, sort of building a brand can kind of help, the sense of creating posts on LinkedIn. Yeah, creating posts on LinkedIn. It's just, in my opinion, it takes a while to create that kind of presence and get that kind of traction. So for me, it's usually product number one. Second is networking. And networking don't just limit it to like selling connection requests on LinkedIn. In most cities, most cities that you are in, there would be like meetups that are happening, so feel free to go and talk to people there and connect with people there as well. Yeah.
That's a really good call out. And it's funny because just earlier today, I saw this post on LinkedIn that did such a great job, kind of demystifying what it means when somebody says networking. So the way this particular post approached it was just make a list of, well, actually, you would just search your field, right? So just search data science
Mhm.
and a bunch of people will show up, and then every day send out like whatever 10, 15 connect requests, and don't stop there. Once they accept, then reach out to them and you further build that connection. Maybe don't bug them for a coffee chat immediately, but if you have stuff in common, then you can be like, hey, I really need help with this. Do you think you could look at my project, blah blah. So obviously lots of resources out there. I know you share a ton. So firstly, anybody listening to this, just pause, go to LinkedIn, follow Karun right now. I promise it will be worth your while, because just in this past week, while I was looking through your stuff to prepare for this discussion, I was just blown away by not just the depth, but the breadth of the content that you share. So really appreciate you doing that. Yeah, of course, man. Like you're doing God's work here. So shifting gears just a little bit. For our audience that is just kind of tuning in, and also really myself, do you mind providing like a really quick and dirty snapshot of kind of your career path so far, just so that we can contextualize where all of the information that you're sharing is coming from? Obviously, in addition to the 20,000 or so people that you helped already, it would be good for us to kind of know what the basis of all of your expertise is.
For sure. So did my bachelor's in engineering, obviously, guy in India. So chose computer science and engineering, and landed a role as sort of like a full stack developer, uh, kind of API developer. I was in that role for about 2 years and was very lucky to meet sort of my first mentor who wanted to develop like an analytics wing to our engineering department. um, Essentially started working as a data analyst, sort of worked on Hadoop, so I guess a big data analyst, and then had the opportunity to work a bit more on the predictive sides, got introduced to ML, met a few more mentors who taught me a lot, but reached a point where a lot of those folks essentially moved away from the company. I plateaued in terms of learning. Didn't have a lot of mentors who could guide me at that point, and that's when I decided, okay, maybe a master's might be a good idea. This was like in my third year. Tried the first time. I had like a decent GRE score and a few papers, and I think by that time, via Dell, we had sort of filed a patent. So you
Oh,
could
wow.
say I was, yeah, you could say I was kinda maybe overconfident that I would get like an admit at one of the colleges. I only applied for five, and those five were kind of big colleges. I got rejects from all five. Uh, so yeah, next time that definitely humbled, and yeah, next time again focused sort of into. I mean, like essentially reestablished myself. Okay, how did I get here? I got here because of mentors, because of a lot of feedback. Okay, let me go into that process again. Reached out to a lot of folks who are working or graduated from a few of my colleges, specifically my dream college, which was CMU. Reached out to them. How did you land your admit? Again, mostly everything was through LinkedIn. Got them to review a lot of my SOPs and how to write good LORs and how to write a good resume, what kind of projects to choose, how to present those projects, all those things. And went back into that mentor and feedback loop, helped re-elevate my application, and was very lucky enough to get an admit from CMU. Did my master's here, master's in data science, and then um, again got a bit lucky in the sense we I joined in 2019. 2020, obviously the pandemic hit. So a couple of us got like our initial internship offers rescinded. Like 2020, beginning Jan, Feb, March was kind of a bit vague in the job market because companies were calling back essentially their offer letters. It improved like eventually from summer onwards because Amazon, a lot of like the e-commerce and fan companies started hiring en masse. And was lucky enough to sort of land an internship in at Amazon and convert that. Worked there as a data scientist and applied scientist for about 2.5 years, and now working as senior data scientist at Walmart.
Wow. And sorry, at Walmart, you've been around 2 years, give or take?
Yeah, almost 2 years, a year and a half.
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah.
Awesome. So we will be definitely going into, day in the life stuff just a little bit down the road. For now, I want to kind of shift the light a little bit to your experience at CMU. And while you share kind of, what some of the most notable courses or experiences that you got there were, if you could kind of also juxtapose that beside what generally and a course in or like a master's in data science entails, that would be helpful for maybe anybody that's considering studying that. So how is that different from just a computer science, maybe a master's in computer science? Obviously I get that it would be more specialized, but in what specific ways? And then, yeah, if you could just also kind of share about your some of the best courses maybe that you did at CMU and pretty much how it helped you get to where you are.
For sure. I guess Master CMU, I think in terms of the kind of information you actually get, almost all colleges are about at the same level because
Interesting.
information is basically free. Anybody can sort of learn anything they want from the internet. It's mostly about hearing that from a professor who's sort of well regarded in the field. CMU happens to have like professors who work on the cutting edge or essentially have established the cutting edge in their field. So it's always good that whenever you have a question, you can ask them and they typically always have an answer. So that is definitely like you learn a lot faster. Uh-huh. And the in terms of again like the course content, it's about the same everywhere. I would say it's more the supporting structure. Like every course has like a humongous amount of TAs. So whenever you get stuck with code, you have office hours almost every other day, and these TAs can really help you debug the code. So again, learning is exponentially faster. And the other thing is the assignments and exams are extremely hard.
Oh, wow.
Like
And
yeah,
that's true for all of these colleges, right? That you said in that bracket that kind of fall
yeah.
under. Okay.
Yeah, CME especially is kind of hedonistic in the sense that they actually pride themselves on the fact that their SES or School of Computer Science students get the least amount of sleep.
Really?
In so yeah, the assignments are definitely grueling. Lot of late nights. So essentially in data science problems, you're trying to fit a model, apply different types of techniques to improve that model and get a certain amount of performance. So depending upon the amount of performance you get certain grades. So let's say if it's like 70%, you get C, 80,
Interesting.
and it gets exponentially harder to get a better grade. So yeah, you essentially I still remember, okay, letting the model run. So if it's DL models, you're running it over epochs. So you set a timer when you think that 100 epochs are gonna finish. You go to sleep, you get up like an hour later and you see how the it's performing. So yeah, the assignments are definitely growing. Yeah, the assignments are definitely growing. And but yeah, the learning's really exponentially faster than any other place that I've been. Um, and in terms of courses, CMA is again like really good in that manner. Most of the courses are available openly on YouTube. Intro to machine learning, intro to deep learning, machine learning for text mining. These are three courses that I really like, and I still use the notes from those courses before I go into interviews. Like I have like my notes that I sort of keep along with my passport of that importance. So yeah, I still review those notes before my interviews. All the courses are available on YouTube. You can just search for them and
Amazing.
you can feel it. Yeah.
I'll be linking all of those in the show notes for anybody willing to check those out. And actually, like I want to kind of keep this moving, but I do also want to pause and ask you this one thing that you said about that assignment. So it's funny because for my master's, I went to Purdue. I just studied engineering management, so nothing as crazy as or as deeply tech as what you did. But one of the courses that I did take, which was probably the best course that I took in my entire master's, it was called artificial intelligence or intro to AI, something like that. It was still like it was a 6,000 level course, so there were some PhDs and such that also took it in their first years. And I remember for the project or the final project for that course, we had to either implement a paper that had been published in the last 2 years in, I forget the names of the journals, but I'm sure you would know. But it wasn't even like you could just pick anything, but you had to pick one of those two or three, and in the last 2 or 3 years, and then you had to re-implement what they had done. So obviously, I mean, it just drove me crazy. I don't even know how, but I was able to find an easy enough paper to just kind of implement that. My reason for sharing all of this random things with you is when you say that you have to train the model until it gets to like a certain degree of accuracy, I think is what you said.
Mhm.
Can you just give us an example for us to understand what exactly is going on here? So, if you could just maybe lay out the problem statement and just for us to contextualize exactly what it is that makes it such a challenging assignment slash problem to solve.
For sure. Now, let's say, okay, in intro to DL, one we have like four or five to six like main assignments, and then you have like a major project. So in one of the assignments, essentially it was a computation problem, kind of a multi-class classification problem. Essentially, you just need to bucket it into one of like the 128 classes. Um, you the essential idea is you have to figure out what kind of CVDL framework would actually work well on the dataset that is provided. In addition, what kind of additional data processing techniques, like in CV, it's sort of uh, things that notoriously work well in CV don't work in other domains. So CV has a lot of nitty-gritty stuff like data augmentation specific stuff that works really well. A lot of techniques like teacher enforcing that also kind of work fairly well in terms of like fine tuning a model. So it's basically um, um, simplest way to look at it is you have an objective function. You want to minimize it as much as possible, and you're uh, trying a bunch of different techniques in terms of like changing the model, changing the number of layers in the model, um, trying different augmentation techniques, trying different learning techniques to sort of get that minimization as much as possible. So it's a lot of hit and trial. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I was getting at. I guess would a one way of thinking about it would be you're kind of choosing between k means versus k nearest neighbor. Like you would have to implement both of those and find out which did better. Is that way off, or is that kind of
No,
what
no,
you were getting at?
it's sort of like that. The only difference is like I guess the only call out I want to make is like typically, yes, folks sort of do that in the sense that they try out, they fit each model and they figure out which one works the best. The only sort of addition I would make to that is fit each model, figure out what went wrong, based on what went wrong, make an assumption on how it could improve, then go and choose the next model. So yeah, instead of like sequentially fitting every model. But yeah, basically it's that. Yeah.
Wow, that is so cool. Like these are some of the times where I really feel like I should have done more there, but yeah, maybe I can. Your YouTube courses that you mentioned hopefully will scratch that itch for me. So, moving forward here, next I want to kind of understand what it was like for you to go through the whole internship process. So obviously, I know you said lots of late nights. So you're doing all of your these assignments which seem to never end, but on the side you also have to keep applying for these internships and such. So can you paint that picture for us in general? What does that internship search look like? And then what are some of the ways that you would recommend current students in master's degrees all over the US or really the world can, maybe we can focus on the US, I guess, but yeah, how they can maximize the chances of landing that internship.
Mhm. So how my process looked like would be a, quite a lot different from what I recommend because I learned a lot. My process was a bit haphazard in the sense that so the first and foremost thing is to make sure you have your project, like your portfolio or set of projects that you want to sell in your resume ready.
Oh, yeah.
So once so that I was able to get together fairly quickly, primarily because the course at CMU was fairly intensive within the first semester itself. We had like 3 to 4 projects we could put on our resume,
Okay.
which is pretty good. Like we got that feedback from our seniors that these are the courses that if you take by the end of the first semester itself, you'd have good projects on your resume. So that was quite helpful. So resume by the end of the semester, most of us had that down. The networking part was where I was pretty late to the game. I would say I didn't network enough, and I focus a lot more on cold applications. Was lucky enough to get a few callbacks. I think primarily a bit because of those projects that our seniors said would work well in the market. And mostly how the application process looked like, I guess, is you spend the majority of your day on your assignments and on your coursework. Towards the tail end of the day, like an hour in the hour at sort of like in the night, you focus on applications. You set a timer and you try and apply as much as possible because it is sort of like a very uh disheartening process. The
Yeah.
applications,
I mean,
yeah,
nobody looks forward to that, I can assure you.
yeah, it's yeah, it's definitely something that can burn you out fairly quickly. So you take an hour, put on some music, and just apply, try and take the emotional aspect out of it. And yeah, apart from that, for our roles, lead code was required, and I was a bit weak in lead code. So mornings I would try and spend maybe an hour trying to solve at least 1 or 2 problems. And the rest of the theory portion, how coursework was taking care of it, like MLDS theory, and I had my notes that I would sort of refresh before any interview came around. So that was sort of like the rhythm I fell into. The only optimization I would make on that rhythm was definitely continue with the lead code, definitely continue with the applications. If you aren't in a course that helps to keep your MLDL theory up to date, or if you don't have like that set of notes that you can quickly refer to before interviews, make sure you have those. The only additional thing is maybe you have 100 connection requests you can send out a week. I mean, again, LinkedIn sort of updated itself, and now you can only send 5 for free, I guess, a month, a week or a month, I guess. So you might have to go into LinkedIn Premium. But if you have LinkedIn Premium, 100 connection requests a week with connection messages, use that wisely. Send it to the advice that I give is your connection message should be to the point, requesting a referral for this specific job ID and a one liner on a project that relates to that job description. Well, if you don't have that one liner, then don't send that connection request because people may not respond.
Wow, that is not something that I'd heard before, but it does make just so much sense. Just because having been somebody that has been there also, even though I wasn't applying for data science roles per se, I was definitely having a one liner, but it just used to be, come to think of it, just really generic. And it wasn't really actually adding any weight to why I would be considered for that versus somebody else. So I really love that call out because that immediately makes you stand out, that not only have you done the work, but it's right there for somebody to see if they're interested. It's like you've implemented that. So that's really cool. Um, are there any lead code playlists and such that are fairly easy to find on this, or is that kind of a more hidden type of information, would you say, for this specifically?
For data science, typically I ask mentees to focus on arrays, strings, and dynamic programming. That's what's most commonly asked. Most mentees sort of skimp out a bit on the preparation for dynamic programming, and that usually comes to bite them. So I would say focus on those three. If you go to LeetCode and if you just search dynamic programming patterns, there is a really good post that breaks it down. I think there are like 6 main patterns that it's broken into. It's sort of like learning trig in high school. Initially, you just by heart a lot of formulas. You have no idea what to use when, but eventually, if you keep at it long enough, that sort of pattern recognition, your brain kicks in and you're like, oh, this is that pattern. I just need to use it here. So you just need to keep trying till that pattern recognition starts to kick in. LeetCode Blind 75 is the list that I sort of recommend everybody start with, and also before your interviews levels.
Makes sense. And then just to confirm, it does sound like though that even if somebody were to just spend all the time just doing lead code, it would probably not be enough, right? They would still need
Hmm.
to understand the theory. They would need to have projects. Like you need almost, it sounds like three different sectors that you need to be covered off well in all of them in order to you like land those positions. That's right, right?
Definitely. In terms of data science interview prep, so data science is has sort of two kind of distinct roles. There's product data science and applied data science. So product data science is a bit more focused on working closely with your business stakeholders and helping them make sort of go, no go decisions. So it's a lot more SQL, statistics, causal inference, and dashboarding to essentially help business make better decisions. Applied data science is a bit more modeling focused. So for applied data science, the interview has, I would say, kind of three main verticals. One is obviously the coding part, lead code and data structures algorithms and SQL. These are the two things that you need to be fairly good at. Lead code, you have the lead code blind 75. Similarly, you have lead code SQL 50 and advanced SQL 50. These are three lists. If you are comfortable with all three, you would pretty good in, I would say, 80% of the interviews. Um, Apart from that, the next vertical is sort of the stats and basic ML vertical. So statistics means hypothesis testing, A/B testing. These are the most commonly asked topics. Be very good in those two. And ML, there are like 6 basic algorithms that you really need to make sure you know, which is linear regression, logistic regression, KNN, K-means, support vector machines, and trees. When I say trees, I mean like the full spectrum from
Yeah.
this
Not is it I know.
forest bag.
Yeah.
Huh. So all the trees, so those 6 algorithms, what the model assumptions are, when to use what are each one's sort of strong points and weaknesses. That's typically where questions come from, like what are the assumptions for linear regression? How do you test for heteroscedasticity in linear regression? Why is randomization important in random forest? So those kind of questions can come up. And the next vertical is sort of your specialization vertical or the team's specialization vertical. And it could be like a DL field. It could be more machine learning business domain oriented field. You can see more like case study questions. Like if you're going for a Rexus team, they might ask you questions like how do you design the Instagrams for you page? So they're trying to figure out what kind of data you're hoping to leverage, what kind of models you would experiment with, and how you'd evaluate and improve those.
And this was on the product side, you said, right? What you're currently talking about with the for you as opposed
Yep.
to the applied. Okay, makes sense. Yeah.
Yep.
Mm.
Yep. No. The For You page is just the third vertical of the applied data science.
Oh, I see. I see.
So,
Makes sense. Yeah.
for product data science, the interviews would look kind of, I mean, quite a bit different. Like you would still have your SQL coding rounds. Um, then you typically also have stat rounds. But the other rounds, the case study rounds, are more called these metric rounds where you really need to understand business metrics and how to sort of define them. And more importantly, there are um, uh, questions that typically, I would say, product manager or consulting
Right.
roles are
Like a
which is
case study, like a case interview, I mean, almost, right?
kind of, yeah, those kind of questions. Typical questions like the traffic went down the site over a period of time. How would you try and resort it? Those kind of questions. So more of like root causing an issue. There are like 4 main categories. There is a book I think it's called Ace the PM Interview. It's a pretty good book.
Oh, yeah. It's so
Yeah,
famous. Yeah.
yeah. So that's a pretty good book to get started with. Yeah.
I think that's very interesting because I don't think until just now I had even considered that there is such a strong link between data science and these type of roles. So I'm almost wondering why even go through the trouble of what you did, which is like all of those assignments, all of the sleepless nights, all of those lead code grinding. If somebody knows that they want to for sure get into the product side of data science, is there, I mean, obviously the answer is no, but I'm still tempted to ask, quote unquote, a shortcut in terms of what they could follow to only aim for these roles and not the applied ones? Or is that just
Uh,
possible?
right now the market is fairly competitive. So if somebody has like the same projects and somebody with a master's degree would kind of be preferred. So right now the market is competitive. 2025 it could get better. I would say masters definitely does improve your chance, but it's not definitely not the only way. Like I know a lot of product data science folks who sort of after their bachelor's they got into data analytics. They did SQL dashboarding and helping drive decision making, and that sort of matured into product data science roles. So that is definitely another way to go about it. It's also a fairly common path in product data science to come from data analytics, and data analytics is like very receptive to freshers, not
That's
really
true.
that,
That's very true.
yeah,
Yeah.
and not really that, it doesn't prefer master students that much. It's more, I would say, maybe a bit more focused on whether you can um, provide insight, I would say.
Makes sense. And I guess from there, I think the difference between data analytics and data science is now pretty clear to anyone listening. I guess, could you also similarly help us untangle data science, data engineering, and machine learning engineering? I know there's some overlaps at least, but it would be great if you could just kind of, for people that are confused, where one ends and the other begins. Just if you could just separate those out for me.
For sure. So let's start with maybe data engineering because that's sort of top of the funnel. So their role essentially is to make usable data available. So usable in the sense that the data is the quality of the data is high and it's delivered at a specific or agreed upon time at a location every, let's say, whatever the agreed frequency is. So it involves a lot of engineering in the sense, if you need to bring the data over, you might need to know streaming services, not just like SQL pipelines, but streaming services like Apache Kafka. If it's a lot of data and you need to pre-process it, you need to know distributed computing like PySpark. Sometimes you need to bring data over in async manner, so you need to know stuff like Apache Kafka. So a lot of that, and then a lot of your ops side, which you see in pretty much any kind of engineering, which is making sure everything's working fine and everything's reliable.
Or that type of
Ops
Kubernetes.
side, as in uh, it could be used in the distributed processing, but by ops I mean more like monitoring,
Oh, I
in the sense that sort of making sure everything is up and running, and if anything goes wrong, they get alerts and they're able to fix it. So a bit of that. It's mostly like the field. It's engineering for like basically data. That's top of funnel, making the usable data available to everyone. And yeah, and they sort of the high performers in the field essentially create data sets that are from which you can extract a lot of value. And yeah, it's a if you are really good at your job, it's something that pays off in a lot of different ways because your single high quality valuable data set can be used by so many different people to create so many different reports which can drive a lot of insights. So uh, other people are depending upon you, so use your work gets like exponential recognition, with which is what the high performers do. Data science would be just below the funnel. They utilize the data for product data science to help drive decision making, apply data science to build models that either drive decision making in one way or maybe improve like customer experiences in manners like recommendation systems. So that would be the data science field. They have a bit of mostly a heavy focus in statistics, machine learning, and modeling. Machine learning engineering sort of is the bottom of the funnel. Um,
okay.
the field essentially is mostly about once the model is sort of defined, okay, this is the model that we are going to be using to make, let's say, our predictions for this particular problem. They are responsible for hosting, serving, deployment, scaling, and maintaining that model. That's typically what machine learning engineers does, but it differs a lot from company to company. Like in companies like Facebook, MLEs are the ones who sort of choose and improve the model. I don't think they have applied data scientists. They have just product data scientists and machine learning engineers. In Google, almost everything is handled by software engineers. It's just they have roles like software engineer, machine learning, and software engineers. And then they have data scientists who are just product data scientists. So it differs a lot from company. Most of my experience is sort of contextualized by Amazon, which has like, okay, data scientist, applied scientist, machine learning engineer sort of divided out.
Mm-hmm. That makes a lot of sense, especially because on this podcast I had Nikhil Pentapalli, who I know you might know. So he's obviously at Adobe. He's a senior machine learning engineer, and he shared that a lot of his job is not just what you mentioned. So actually tweaking the models and making sure that they work to the degree that they would want it to, but also worry about the UX side of things. Like, how do you
Yeah.
use that exact model to make sure that the product goal is served? And it was really interesting to me that he was wearing both those hats, because it kind of makes intuitive sense for that to be the case. But I can also see another company where they would just kind of divvy that up, and they would be like, your job ends here, just write the model and you're good. And then someone else, just maybe like a more proactive or just a more hands-on product manager, would then be responsible for the UX side of things or how to implement. And they would work with what are they called, product designers, I believe is the term, which one of whom I also talked to. He helped design, or he currently helps design Edge product design. So that was really cool, because he had also mentioned that at Microsoft they had like just an entire swaths and armies of these just model developers, and then his job is to just make sure that it gets deployed one small feature at a time, and they don't ship something so big that everybody just kind of loses their minds, and they're like, what is this, we didn't ask for this, we don't want this. So it's really cool how, yeah, just this entire landscape is just so diverse, and there's just, yeah, I just, yeah, I'm just really intrigued by how it all goes down on the ground level.
Yeah.
So really
Roles
appreciate
can,
that, deal. Like,
the roles can definitely overlap a lot. It really depends upon the company and how they sort of define the JD and the job description.
exactly. But I guess from the other side of things, as an interviewer or as an applicant, I think if you have your potential, USP well defined, like, this is what I'm good at, this is my entire experience, all
Yep.
pointing towards this one thing. And then after that, it just becomes a matter of making sure that you do a really good job at highlighting what it is that
Yep.
thing is, and then kind of you pray from there. So similar to, and the reason I bring that up is Nikhil, for instance, his whole career just happened to be all around documents. Like, since his first job after bachelor's, he was working with documents. His internship was with like a legal insurance document company. And then it just made so much intuitive sense that he did, ended up getting hired at Adobe, which is literally the only company that comes to mind when you think document. So from there, kind of shifting gears a little bit, can you talk about your interview experience, or maybe actually just the hiring experience at Walmart? Because I think that was when you were no longer a student, you were just a full blown person in the market. I think you would qualify as probably a junior level, or just a, actually, yeah, what was your level at Amazon before I assume that?
Mid, I would say. Yeah.
Okay, mid. Okay, perfect. So when you were that mid-level data science engineer in the market, thriving, what was that experience like for you? And for people like that, what would you share in terms of how they can be looking at, or they should be looking at getting hired for the next role?
Again, I guess tackling the job market, the main sort of pillars remain the same, which is networking comes to first. I mean, sorry, projects come first. Have your resume ready. The next is networking with sort of like your projects and your resume and your LinkedIn up to date. So those sort of, I guess, mechanisms remain pretty much the same. It just differs in sort of how you communicate what you have done in the resumes. So like if you're an entry level or a junior level data scientist, you would focus a bit more on uh, sort of execution, whereas for mid level, it's a bit more on design and ideation. So you talk a little bit more about how you experimented with stuff and chose. Whereas in entry, you might just be like, okay, this is more about implementation and
Mhm.
how you achieved a particular objective.
Makes
So,
sense. And in terms of an internship versus full time, are there any differences in the process, or is that also kind of the same pretty much?
uh, kind of the same because it for me, it was slightly different, primarily because when I was, like I mentioned, I had like an offer got pulled, so I needed to land an offer soon. So what my approach was, I leveled down. I aimed for an entry level internship. So an entry level internship and sort of like applying for a senior role, which is what I landed at Walmart. That obviously has like certain differences. But in terms of like an internship versus a full time role, I think the process is roughly the same from an interview standpoint. Yeah, the process roughly the same in terms of like number of interviews and what you're tested on.
So, this is also something that I just feel like comes up across industries, across whatnot. When you're trying to, as you said, level down, where your experience says that you should be joining as a mid level, but you're okay with joining as a junior level. How do you, I guess, play those cards with the hiring manager and such? Because in my experience, like the one time that happened with me, it did not go well. I was basically told that, "Hey, you're wasting your time as well as ours, so maybe don't do that." But I'm just curious to learn about how you kind of played that because it is tricky, right? It's not as easy as it sounds.
Yeah, for sure. For me, it's mostly the kind of action verbs I use primarily in my resume.
Really?
So yeah, so for me, I felt like for entry level resumes, it should be focused a bit more on implementation and driving execution, whereas like mid level resumes was more about leading and designing and like I mentioned, ideation. So tweaking those things a little bit, making sort of like my experience section slightly smaller and project section slightly bigger. Those I felt might um, essentially not make it seem like to the
Yes.
team that, hey, I'm just landing this role because I need something, and when something better comes along, I'll just leave. So the sort of those tweaks in the resume I felt like made me a kind of like a suitable for entry level.
Yeah, no, that's a great call out actually. That makes a lot of sense. And I don't know if many people would think to do that. So that makes it also, a really good call out. And then I guess from there, can you share maybe just what a day in the life looks like for an applied data science professional in like the mid level category?
For sure. So a day in the life kind of differs based on where you are in the project. So maybe just walking through the phases of a project. So initially, um, we mostly get our sort of like problem statements from business or from leadership, like data science leadership, who sort of established the vision for the next 1 year, and based on those visions, those goals, what we call the 1 year plan goals. That sort of gets trickled down, and we have like sub goals that's within the team. So we have like a bit of direction from our data science leadership as well as direction from business on what problems are good to solve. That sort of gets mixed up and we get like a roadmap for the year. So initially when you're on a project, you're in the what we call discovery phase. You're trying to understand what exactly or how best to actually solve that problem, which all teams should be involved, what kind of data is available, what's the quality of that data. Sometimes at the end of discovery, we might actually find that the quality of the data is not sufficient to build a quality model, and we might drop the project then and there. But yeah, typically it's a lot of, I would say, simple stats and visualizations to check the quality of data, talk to other teams, communicate. I mean, like, talk to other teams and see if they would be open to like collaborating and giving us data so that we can improve the model. A lot of hypothesis testing, a lot of data quality assessment. So that's going to be how the day is. A lot of meetings and a lot of data testing. Once the discovery is over and once we figure out that, okay, this is solvable, we essentially develop what's called like a BRD, a business requirement document of like this requirement, this how we are going to solve it, this sort of like rough timelines, stuff like that. That's after that, that's when we actually start trying to solve the problem. So you do a bit of literature survey. So again, depending on where you are in that phase, the day day in life kind of differs, but you typically do a bit of literature review of how people have solved this problem in the past. You figure out what kind of models you want to experiment with, and you try and test out those models. Things don't always go well, but yeah, you try and solve problems as and when they come up, and you try and build out, okay, this is for a V0 version. You may get like 4 to 6 weeks to try out different experiments, and for a V0 version, this is what I got. This is how the model sort of falls short, and these are some improvements that I think I can do in the future. And then you need to put your V0 into production and see if it's actually making an impact. So typically, you have a no ML baseline solution. That's sort of your A, and your B is your ML solution. You compare and see if you're making an impact. If you make a good impact, you get sort of green light to continue improving the model. So yeah, depending on which phase you're in the product, like in the discovery phase, talking and data testing. Here it's experimentation. Here it's doing error analysis on the model to figure out where it's falling short and how to improve the model. And yeah, this last phase can go on for years because
Yeah, I was just gonna say exactly. Yeah. So, first of all, really appreciate that. That was such a great deep dive. Two questions off of that. First, do you normally just use is just agile a thing in terms of how you kind of run those projects, like at least from a life cycle POV? And then secondly, what are some of the tools and or languages that come to mind when you think of each of those cases that you just went?
for sure. Is agile a thing? Yes, in certain ways, in the sense that, at Amazon, we didn't have like week-long sprints. Our PM essentially felt that a week is too short a time for data scientists to work on a model and get insights, which is kind of true. So he ran like 4 week sprints. Where at the start of the month, we would have like a what we call a grooming session to make sure that everything's sort of in the Jira. And then weekly meetings would be there for each project you're working on, where you would give updates. And at the end of the month, you would essentially have what we call retrospective
Yeah,
sessions to
yeah.
see. Yeah,
That sounds like pretty agile to me. All things
yeah,
considered.
yeah. That's basically agile. It's just the definition that the sprint is in 1 week. It's basically 4 weeks.
Yeah, true.
Walmart sort of, yeah, it's kind of similar. And yeah, in terms of tools, the initial phase, like I said, discovery, it's gonna again, everybody uses different things. Some people like just Excel. Myself, I like Python a lot, and most of the packages in Python support whatever I want. And whatever is the internal tool for communication and meetings is what we use. Again, for model experimentation, in terms of literature review, Google Scholar and a mix of ChatGPT, Perplexity, that's typically what I use.
Okay.
And again, Python and a couple of packages within it would be what's heavily used. And in terms of like how you interact with the infra, whatever your infra is, that's typically what you use. Like in Amazon, obviously AWS is what everything runs on.
Right.
At Walmart, it's Google. So pretty much GCP is what everything runs on. And we have like a couple of internal tools for primarily ETL, like handling the data. Every company has like their own specific tools.
Right.
So you might need to pick up a few of those. And yeah, once you go into like A/B testing and productionization, a few open source tools come into the picture. PySpark is very common. Docker is very common. Airflow is very common. And a couple of like visualization tools. Tableau is sort of market leader. And
I thought it would be Power BI, but I guess probably not. If you're not affiliated to Microsoft, that doesn't make as much sense.
possible, yeah. Yeah, I mean, that's per yeah, I mean, so AWS has its own version called QuickSight. So we were encouraged to use QuickSight.
I've never even heard of that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, but Tableau sort of, I did see a lot of teams still using Tableau, and Google also has its own version called, I think, Looker. But a lot of teams still do use Tableau. So that there are like, a lot of visualization tools, but I think Tableau kind of still exists for some. I mean, like every A/B testing, it again depends upon the cloud platform you are on.
For sure.
Yeah, that
Makes sense.
with all the tools.
And I guess in hindsight, while you were answering that, I just realized that, hey, if somebody just had all of those things on their resume, wouldn't that be great?
And that would be.
That was just, I guess, yeah, an added bonus of you sharing that. That's not even like why I was asking. I was just genuinely curious about what, how much you're jumping around from tool to tool.
For sure.
Um, and then really just the last question here before I let you go, and it's really more of I'm just looking for your take more than anything else. But with all of this AI stuff, and literally last week we had Mark Zuckerberg say that in 2025 Meta is going to try to replace, or start replacing their mid-level engineers just with AI. Like they basically not replace them, but just do away with them. So in this entire, you know, fear that we are in currently, I was going to say that we are headed, but actually that's wrong because we're literally in it now. Um, how do you think this all plays down? Like, do you see AI writing models for us, or do you think that some software engineering fields will be impacted, others not so much? But just generally looking for your take in terms of the whole software engineering AI doomsday theories out there.
I don't know if I would call it like a doomsday theory. So for me, AI is just so I used to code heavily in C when I was in college. Now I'm pretty much on Python, and I could never even imagine going back to C. So for me, AI is just another huge wrapper language on what I want to do. The essence of a software developer, which is that kind of logical thinking, figuring out how to get things to work, that is still gonna be required. The amount of work that you can get done would probably exponentially improve because you're probably gonna be communicating the same way that we are. Definitely not in 2025. That's sort of like an Elon Musk self-driving cars are gonna be around kind of prediction. But yeah, I mean, they sort of have to make those kind of predictions so that they can motivate their teams. But probably in our lifetime, definitely, yeah. I think his proposition of mid-level engineers being replaced by AI, definitely, I think in our lifetimes that could happen. But it just means that just like when instead of coding in something like Pascal, you might take like days to implement
Or writing
support is that.
machine assembly code, right? Yeah.
Yeah, essentially. So it's just another step so that you can exponentially increase. So the role of software developer will never go away. That logical thinking, the idea of like getting systems to work, all of that is still going to be valuable. You just need to dive deeper into the business, specialize in your business domain a lot more so that you can translate those business goals better into software. And, yeah, I think a lot more new roles will hopefully open up.
Absolutely. Um, as we wrap up, any last final pieces of advice for pretty much doesn't have to be even job seekers, but really any person that's even remotely interested in data science?
I think primarily just having mechanisms that help you keep up to date in the field is going to work. Don't sort of force yourself to be that person who reads a research paper every week or anything like that. Mechanisms that you enjoy. It can be something like podcast. It can be like just following a creator on LinkedIn or even Instagram. A lot of us are on Instagram nowadays. So anything that helps you keep up to date so that whenever you hear something interesting, you can sort of maybe one of the weekends read up on it a bit more or watch another podcast on it a bit more, just so that you're up to date, so that whenever you feel like, okay, maybe I should look into upskilling, stuff like that, you can. Just having that mechanism is good, and I think that's pretty much all there is to it. There's no like urgent doomsday coming. Everything's gonna roll out slowly. We're gonna have time. Everybody's gonna have time. So just make sure you keep an open mind, are willing to upskill. You should be fine.
Love that optimism. And I just want to add to that, that, as just myself being a person that doesn't really come from the field, like I'm pretty far from data science, if we're being honest, but just kind of on the border, on the fence enthusiast type of guy. To your point about just being or having mechanisms to keep up to date, keep oneself up to date. I listened to the Lex Fridman interview with the Cursor, with the developers that made Cursor, which is just, it's basically just purely technical. They just go really into the weeds of things. And I was just blown away by how much I enjoyed. And I definitely did not think I would enjoy that at all. So definitely what you're saying rings very true, at least in my case. So yeah, people out there just, it's not, it feels inaccessible sometimes, but just give it a shot. And I think you'd be surprised by just how much you can glean and apply to your life to really just make it better. So really want to thank you today, Karun, for taking the time to talk to us and to share your expertise and your experience. Catch you all in the next one. New episodes every Wednesday.